All right, so by now you should have pieces constructed. We're to a part where we want to embellish the doublet itself. You should have 3 piles, okay? One pile should be your fashion layer. We're going to talk about that layer here in a second. Another pile should be your lining layer, okay? If you have multiple linings, you will have multiple lining layer piles. Your lining should be put together. The entire body of the lining should be put together. Okay, that is the front and the back pieces. That's what I mean by the body. Okay, and the sleeves should be sewn along the seam as well, but they should be still separate. Do not attach your sleeves to your body. We will do that later. Okay, same day, with the collar lining, we'll do that later. And the skirting lining, we'll do that later. Just where your skirting, all the skirting linings, your epaulette, your partlet pieces, your collar, and all that should be just in a separate pile. That's your 3rd pile. So you have your fashion layer, okay, your lining layers, and then your miscellaneous extra pieces. You'll see how all this comes together later. But right now we want to talk about embellishment. The doublet I have on has a standard trim pattern that you would see in a lot of period doublets, okay? It does a couple of things. One, it breaks up the pattern, okay? This is a very lovely chenille fabric, but if I didn't put the trim on it, it would look like a couch, okay? We don't want to look like furniture. We want to look really nice. And so we use the trim to frame out the pattern. That's what this trim pattern does. It kind of just frames out the fabric and shows it off. It also breaks it up a little bit. I used a contrasting trim on this. This is why I picked this particular doublet. You don't have to. You can use like I could have used a black or a dark navy blue trim on this. Probably would have looked just as good. You can see on the back side seam where it's right on each side of the seam. Okay? You can see on my shoulder where it's on either side of the shoulder seam or either side of the collar seam up here. What that's doing is that's reinforcing that seam. Okay? And the reason we put it around the armhole, it helps reinforce the armhole and not let it stretch out too much. So the trim is actually acting like a shaping mechanism as well. So it helps to reinforce the body of the doublet and show it off a little bit and frame it out and everything else like that. In a second here, I'm going to show you how we do attach the trim onto the doublet. I just wanted to show this doublet off to begin with and what a standard trim pattern is, so that if you're having trouble being creative, this is a great fallback position. It's real easy to do. I'm going to be doing it on the 2 doublets I'm constructing, and so I'll show you how to do it. Now Richard's doing a slightly different trim pattern. He's decided we're going to highlight the pattern in different ways. As it comes along, we'll show it off on film and everything else like that. But Valerie is doing an applique piece on the front of the doublet she's constructing. Essentially, this is her fashion layer. Okay, this is the main body of her doublet. So this is what you would normally see. But she's going to take this gorgeous fabric and we're going to applique a slightly smaller piece in the exact same shape onto the front of this. So you'll see about 2 inches of this kind of purplish lavender fabric showing all the way around the edge of this fabric. It'll make a nice little frame, and then we'll cover up the edge with some trim. The first thing we've done is we've cut a piece that's exactly the same size. This will allow us to lay it on as we have. The next thing we've done, and you can come up and look a little closer later, is we've traced out the piece that we're actually going to be showing. Okay? So all this extraneous fabric on the edge is going to get cut off here in a second. Okay? What we're going to do is we're pinning this wrong side to right side. It's one of the few times you'll actually do that, because we're not going to be trying to hide anything. All we're trying to do is make one piece out of these 2. okay? And we want both right sides showing when we finish. All we're really going to do is secure these two pieces together. So we're going to use our pins to kind of just go around and secure it together so that it's placed, and this is why we cut it basically the same size, so it's easy to match up. I know where all the edges are because they all match up, okay? After we get this secure, what we're going to do is we're going to go along and we're going to run a straight stitch from our machine along the chalk line that we've already drawn on here. It's just going to be a straight stitch all the way around. All Valerie's going to do is she's going to go put this in her machine, and she's going to follow along this line with a straight stitch. Then, after we take it off the machine and we take our pins out, we're going to come through with our scissors, and we're going to cut as close to that straight stitch as possible. This is the easiest way to do an applique piece. You can do any design like this, okay? The banners that we have over on the wall there were done exactly the same way, okay? You can see we did clovers and swords and flowers, okay? All I did was I took a big square piece of fabric, I drew the clover on it, pinned it to the other fabric, did my straight stitch all the way around the edge of the clover, and then cut away the excess fabric. And lo and behold, I have a clover now sewn to my fabric. This makes putting it on so much easier. If you were to cut the shape out ahead of time, pin it to the fabric, and then try to sew along the edge, you're going to have all kinds of wrinkles. And it's gonna move all over the place on you, okay? By cutting it bigger than it is, okay? And you guys will see how this works. It's like witchcraft. It's awesome. This won't move, okay? Yeah, we may stab ourselves with a couple pins here and there, but we're not going to have any wrinkles because you can see I'm not putting any pins over where the line is, okay? They're on the outside of the line. Now, we'll probably put maybe even a couple pins on the inside to just kind of secure it, but I don't want to put any pins over the actual line of the design, okay? Because that way it stays nice and smooth, and it will be exactly where I want it to be, okay? Then what we're going to do, since we're obviously going to have a raw edge there, is we're going to come back and we're going to cover it with trim. Okay? So, you'll see how that goes. You could conceivably do a buttonhole stitch or around the edge of it to cover up that raw edge. That's typically what's done with an applique, and if you look at those banners later, you'll see that that's what we did with those. My cloak's put away right now, but I did a fighting cloak that I use for rapier, and I appliqued my device on there, and all I did was just go over the edge with a zigzag stitch to cover up that raw edge. So I mean, there's many different ways of covering up the raw edge. I like to use trim on a doublet because, well, it looks good. But yeah, so you can see these two pieces are now the same piece. We've married them together. And like I said, we're just going to go along that chalk line that we drew on here. And we went about 2 inches in from the edge. Okay? We used the edge of the pattern piece as our guide, went 2 inches in, and where it was kind of getting a little squirrely, we just kind of freehanded it, gave it a little bit more curve here or there to give it a nice shape. Okay? But we want to follow the basic edge of the pattern when we're doing this piece, so that we continue with the curves of the body, okay? And so that's why we followed this curve up here, and we followed this curve on the side here, and that kind of thing. All right? And we're going to do these two front pieces. We're also going to do the back piece, and we're going to go like that, okay? And then, like I said, you'll see how it comes out. We'll turn the video back on after we get to that stage. So that's how we're going to do the applique piece. Now, for my doublet, okay, this is going to be my arming doublet that I'm making right now. Well, you can see what I've done. I have sewn my two front pieces to my back piece. Okay, that's all I've done. Okay, my shoulders are still disconnected. I've also sewn my little collar piece in because I'm doing a Spanish collar, but that's a little bit different. Okay, But, you know, basically what you want to do is you want to get your side seams put together. And this is going to be that standard trim pattern. I'm going to use the blue chalk. Well, the pink chalk will probably come out. So this is the trim I've chosen to put on this. This is a lovely jacquard trim. You see it's about 1/2 inch to 1 inch wide. It's about, yeah, maybe 3/4 of an inch. And what I want to do is I want to lay it on either side of this seam about 1/2 inch from the seam. That's what I'm looking to do. Now, conceivably, I could cut this piece to length and then try to pin it on there, and it would wrinkle all over the place, and then my fabric would stretch, and then the piece wouldn't be long enough, and it's just a big pain, all right? Now, since this is just trim and it's easy to control, all right, what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to use my trusty chalk and my trusty ruler, and I'm going to sit there and say, I want this edge of this trim to be 1/2 inch away from this seam. So I'm going to line up my seam as best I can underneath my ruler. All right, seams curve a little bit and everything else like that. And I'm going to draw a line using my chalk or whatever fabric marker I want. Then, as I sew, I'm going to go to my machine, and I'm going to sew, and I'm just going to hold my trim there and place it right on the line as I go under the foot. Okay? When I get to about 1/2 inch to 1 inch from the edge, that's when I'll cut the trim off a little bit extra. When possible, we want to hide the ends of the trim in a seam. Okay? And since I know my skirting piece is going to go there, my sleeve's going to go there, I'll hide the ends of the pieces, okay? So I'll do these 2 lines here, I'll do this line here and this line here, and then I'm going to come back, I'm actually going to do a line around the armhole before I sew the shoulder, okay? So that then when I sew the shoulder, those pieces are going to disappear in. Like I said, this is a Spanish collar doublet. So you can see the back of the collar piece is actually part of the back of the doublet. And I've sewn in the front collar piece because when I sew these shoulders, they're all going to sew together. So before I sew my shoulder, I'm going to do a trim line along this collar piece as well. I didn't iron it. But what I'm going to do here is, again, I'm just going to use my ruler. Now this is a curved line, so it's going to be a little bit more difficult. I'm going to have to, you know, I can't just draw a line. I'm going to have to draw a little bit of that curve. Then I'm going to have to place and draw a little bit more of that curve. And eventually, I will get all the way around my curved line. Okay? It'll be easier once I press that seam open. But that's exactly what I'm going to do. You can see I'm just going to draw that chalk line around the curve. And then as I put my trim on, okay, I'm going to follow that line. Now generally when I'm going around a curve with trim, I want to sew the outside of the curve first. That's the long edge of the curve, so that I don't stretch my trim around that curve. Now sometimes you can take trim and iron it in a curve, and that will help. All you do is you press it underneath your iron, you kind of pull it into a curve, and that will help. Problem with that is sometimes when you wash it, it shrinks back to its normal shape and messes things up. No, so I'll do the outer edge of that curve, and then I may have little pleats or little gathers on the inner edge of the curve depending on how deep the curve is. All right? So make sure before you do anything, obviously you want to press your seams so that it's easier to sew on the trim. But you got to kind of plan ahead as you're doing this. I sewed the side seam so that I could put the trim on either side. All right? Then I'm going to put it, and so that I could put it around my armhole, but I didn't sew my shoulder seam yet because I want the ends to go into the shoulder seam. All right? And if I use my ruler to make sure that my trim's the exact same distance from the edge on either side of the shoulder seam, it'll line up. And that's what we want, right? And so you just got to be good when you're drawing your lines. But this is the easiest way to put trim on that I have found. Yes, you can use pins if you want, but it will make your life a living hell. Okay? Another trick I've heard, and I've used it myself, is double-sided tape. You can use the double-sided Scotch tape, little tiny pieces of it to kind of hold the trim in place as you go. That sometimes that will leave little clumps underneath your trim though, so you know, sometimes I like that, sometimes I don't, just depends on how thick the trim is. I've also heard of people using cheapo glue sticks, okay, the kind kindergartners use, okay, the stuff that washes out of fabric, okay. Test your fabric before you're going to do that if you decide to do it. You can glue the trim down and then sew it down on either side, but that can gum up your needle a little bit, as the double-sided tape will. This is why you want to use little tiny pieces of double-sided tape right in the middle of the trim where you're not going to sew. Otherwise, you will gum up your needle, and then it just, again, it makes your life a living hell. So, yeah, the chalk line, it's just, the trim is never really done in long stretches, and even when it is, a chalk line tends to work best. I've done trim over yards of fabric, and I just used chalk lines, and it was so much easier. Okay, the chalk line marks where you want it, just follow the edge of the chalk line. It's just trim, it's got a nice straight edge to it usually. And trim like this, I'm going to sew it down one side, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to sew it down the other side. Thinner trim, sometimes you can use a zigzag. If it's cording, you can use a zigzag stitch to go over the top of it, that kind of stuff. But really honestly, most trims I have found, a straight stitch along each edge is what holds it on there the best. Be creative with how you apply your trim. You've seen the other doublets I've been posting to the event page. You've seen the other doublet examples I've brought here. Go through Janet Arnold, Tudor Taylor, Elizabeth's Wardrobe. You will find all sorts of creative ideas to give you ideas on how to apply or where to apply your trim. This is a simple, basic trim pattern. You can do it if you want to. You don't have to. But you can be creative. Like I said, with Richards, we're doing a diamond pattern on it because we decided that would look the coolest and highlight the pattern the best, okay? So, but really, honestly, you can do pretty much whatever you want. You know, if you could think of it, you can guarantee somebody back in period thought of it too. So be creative about it. You know, how much trim do you need? It depends on how much you want to put on. You saw the blue doublet I had earlier had that has 45 yards of trim on it. Okay, so yeah, I'll pull it out real quick and show you guys again. You think about it. This has at least 45 yards of trim on it, at the very least, okay? It's because it's all sewn in lines, okay? I worked really hard to make sure all that trim disappeared inside the seams, okay? And a lot of this trim I had to apply before I even put it together. So I sewed all the trim onto the front piece before I attached any piece onto it. Sewed all the trim onto all the separate pieces before I sewed the pieces together. That's one way to do it, okay? Another way to do trim is where you actually make the fabric before you even cut the doublet pattern out of your fashion. I've done that with several. You know, we trimmed and purled the doublet to death, and it actually shrank the fabric about 30%. So what did we do? We did the entire piece of fabric and then cut the doublet pattern out of that. Okay, so there's different ways of doing it, but so when you get to your stage where you want to embellish something, yeah, kind of look for inspiration in different places and then go from there. All right. What I wish I had done with this one is attach the skirting piece before I put the trim on the separate pieces, because it didn't end up lining up how I did it. So yeah, that's one thing I would have changed if I did this again. But other than that, I love how it came out, and it's been one of my favorite doublets for many, many years. I've had this doublet for, gosh, over 10 years. So I mean, it's one of my favorite doublets, and it's a little small for me now, so I have to make another one. So all right, any questions on applying trim or what trims to use or what how to be creative or on the applique? Okay. After we get this straight stitch sewn on this applique, we'll videotape the next step so you guys can see it. All right, and I'm going to start getting my trim sewn on here so you can see how I'm applying the trim. Okay. All right. If you haven't gotten it put together yet, put together your lining bodies, put together your lining sleeves. Make sure keep them separate. Okay. Put together your fashion sleeves. We're probably not going to attach trim to that. Unless you're going to attach trim to your fashion sleeves, you can just put them together. Okay. Again, set them aside. Okay. Got it? Got it? Cool. All right.
Two.
All right. So we've gotten the fabrics married together. Okay. And yeah, it's kind of hard to see, but there's a straight stitch that goes all the way around the shape we wanted on the fabric. Now we're going to take our scissors, and I'm just going to dig right in here. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to cut as close to the stitch line as I can without cutting the fabric underneath. Okay? So what I'm actually doing is I'm separating the two fabrics while using my fingers, and I'm doing 1/4 inch cuts. Okay? I'm not cutting more than a little bit of fabric at a time. Sometimes smaller scissors are better. So in this case, I actually prefer pinking shears, or little tiny, or not pinking shears, the little tiny nipper scissors, where you're just cutting, a little bit at a time. Okay, I'm just going to get as much of this off, some of this off as I can so I can show you what's happening. So you can see what's happening. Okay, we've cut that off, and now we're exposing the fabric underneath. You see how that's going to look? And we're going to cover up this raw edge with some trim. Or like I said, you could cover it up with a zigzag stitch or whatever you want. The key is to cut as close to the stitch line as possible without cutting the actual stitches, okay? Remember, you are going to sew back over this edge, okay? So, I mean, if you're, 1/8 of an inch away from the stitch line, that's okay. It doesn't have to be right next. So you want as close as you can, but again, you don't want to cut the fabric underneath. The straight edges obviously are going to be a little bit easier than the curved ones. Now this fabric is quite thick, and so it is making it difficult to cut. I'm trying to get to a point where we actually get some shape in here. But this is a process. Okay, applique is a process, but this is the easiest way to applique anything. Okay, and what I'm going to do, now that I'm up to a corner here, I'm just going to cut off that excess so that I don't have to deal with it anymore. And again, I'm just going to kind of come in here to this corner. Let's see if I can get this curve in here. And we made a little point up at the shoulder here. We're actually going to cover that point up with some trim, but we wanted to kind of carry it up into the shoulder just a little bit because it'll look cool. Okay. You can start to see what we've done is that we've highlighted scissors keep getting caught. Get the rest of this armhole out and you'll see what I'm talking about. You can start to see what we're doing. Okay? We're just highlighting, we're basically creating a frame around this gorgeous piece of fabric. Okay? This is a great idea if you have a lovely piece of fabric that you don't have enough to do an entire doublet out of. That, maybe you have enough to do a front piece and a back piece and that's it. It's a great way to highlight that piece of fabric. You only have like a yard of one piece of fabric, so it's not enough to do an entire doublet out of, but it's enough to add some character to an otherwise plain piece of fabric, okay? But you can see how it's going to work out. Like I said, we're going to cut off the rest of this, and then we're going to sew some trim on, and it'll look really, really cool. All right? You guys like that? Pretty neat, huh? This is the easiest way to do applique. There's lots of other ways to do applique, and you know, talk to people and they'll say, oh, do it this way, it's easier. I mean, you try it out. I've tried many different ways to do applique. Wonder Under sucks. Wonder Under is an iron-on thing you can get from like Joann's or other fabric stores and stuff like that, and basically it creates an iron-on of whatever pattern. And so some people use that. The problem with Wonder Under is as soon as you wash it, that stuff bunches up underneath and it'll create like a big, you know, depending on how big your piece is, it could really mess it up, okay? Double-sided tape, again, works. You know, glue sticks, they work. They'll gum up your machine. So will Wonder Under. I hate Wonder Under, okay? This is why when we get to the collars, we're not going to be doing any kind of interfacing in the collars, okay? You saw how my collars stand up. We're going to be doing pad stitching in the collar. We'll be pad stitching some canvas material into the collar, okay? It's very cool. Again, it's witchcraft. It's awesome. Okay? All right, so just wanted you guys to see this and everybody else like that, okay? All right? All right. And we'll just real quick, just so you guys can see what I'm doing, you know, with how I'm doing with the trim on mine. You can see I've attached trim there and there. I've still got a couple pieces to go. And I did one piece up by the collar. And you can see it's got a nice curve to it. If you look really, really close, there's a little tiny fold right there in the top of the corner of the trim. You can barely see it. And obviously you can't see it unless you're right up on it. And I can't even see it right here. I have to actually use my finger to find it. So, yeah, so I mean, you know, when you're doing a curve, again, you do that outside part of the curve first. Take your iron and just press down on it like a little press, straight down to flatten everything out. It'll cause some folds, and then just sew right over the folds, and it creates a wonderful little curve. All right. What's really interesting thing about this collar is that piece is actually straight. Okay, so I'll be able to sew that piece perfectly straight, whereas the under piece had to be sewn in a curve. Okay? Got it? Cool? You got it, Billy? All right. All right, keep going. Have fun.